My hands trembled as I applied lipstick in the cafe's restroom mirror, the fluorescent light catching every line around my eyes, every silver strand I'd tried to tame with hairspray this morning. 63 years old, and here I was, primping like a teenager before prom. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been 17 the last time I'd gotten ready to see Michael Chen. 46 years. That's how long it had been since I'd seen his face, heard his laugh, felt the flutter in my stomach that his presence always brought. Back then, I was Margaret Sullivan, the shy Irish girl who tutored him in American literature. Now I was Margaret O'Brien, divorced, grandmother of 4, retired librarian with arthritis in my knees and a heart that had learned to protect itself behind careful walls. The reunion invitation had arrived 3 months ago, handwritten on cream-colored paper. "Maggie, I found you through the alumni directory. Would you meet me for coffee? I have so much to tell you. Michael." No last name needed. There had only ever been one Michael who called me Maggie, who made that name sound like music when it rolled off his tongue with the faintest trace of his parents' Taiwanese accent. I'd stared at that letter for weeks, carrying it in my purse, reading it during lunch breaks, tracing his familiar handwriting with my finger. The boy who'd written love poems in my margins, who'd walked me to the bus stop every day senior year, who'd promised we'd find our way back to each other after college. The boy whose parents had other plans, whose scholarship to MIT came with expectations that didn't include a girlfriend from the wrong side of Dorchester. Now, checking my reflection one last time, I wondered what those 4 decades had done to him. Had life been kind? Had he found happiness in the path his family had chosen for him? The Michael I remembered had gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, calloused hands from his after-school job at his father's restaurant, and a way of listening that made me feel like the most important person in the world. I smoothed my navy blue blouse, conservative but flattering, I'd hoped, and walked back into the main cafe. The Thinking Cup on Tremont Street buzzed with the usual Thursday afternoon crowd, college students hunched over laptops, business people grabbing late lunches, tourists consulting their phones. I'd chosen this place deliberately, neutral territory, public enough to feel safe, intimate enough for real conversation. My table by the window offered a clear view of the entrance. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a lavender latte I was too nervous to drink, and now sat watching every person who walked through the door. A woman about my age with silver hair and a kind face smiled at me as she passed. I wondered if she could sense my anxiety, if the decades had taught her to recognize another woman on the precipice of something that could change everything or break her heart all over again. At exactly 3 o'clock, the door chimed. I looked up from my phone where I'd been pretending to read emails, and time folded in on itself. It was him. Older, yes, his dark hair now completely silver, his face lined in ways that spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure. But it was unmistakably Michael. He still had that same way of scanning a room with quiet intensity, still wore glasses, though now they were stylish frames that probably cost more than my car payment. He'd filled out some, the lanky teenager replaced by a man who carried himself with confidence I remembered him growing into during our senior year. When his eyes found mine, his face lit up with a smile that transported me instantly to the back row of Mrs. Brackle's Bolero. Henderson's American Lit class, where he'd slip me notes that made me blush and bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Maggie. He said my name like a prayer as he approached the table, and I stood on unsteady legs, my coffee cup rattling against its saucer as I bumped the table. Michael. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. This close, I could see that his eyes were the same warm brown I'd fallen into 1,000 times, still framed by lashes I'd envied, still crinkled at the corners in the way that had always made me think he was holding back laughter. For a moment, we just stood there, drinking each other in. I was acutely aware of my own aging, of the weight I'd gained and lost and gained again over the years, of the way my hands showed my age, even when the rest of me felt frozen in time. But when Michael stepped forward and opened his arms, muscle memory took over. I fell into his embrace like coming home. He smelled different, expensive cologne instead of the Old Spice he'd worn in high school, but underneath it was something essentially him that made my eyes fill with tears I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry. "You look beautiful, Maggie," he whispered into my hair, and for a moment, I believed him. We sat down across from each other, and I noticed he was empty-handed. "Aren't you going to get something to drink?" "In a minute," he said, leaning back in his chair with that appraising look I remembered. "I want to look at you first. God, Maggie, you haven't changed at all." I laughed, a sound caught between amusement and disbelief. "Michael, I'm 63 years old. I think I've changed quite a bit." "Your laugh hasn't," he said softly. "And your eyes, they're exactly the same, still green as sea glass." The reference to the piece of beach glass he'd given me for my 18th birthday, which I still kept in my jewelry box, made my chest tight. How was it possible that after all these years, he could still read me so easily? "Tell me about your life," I said, deflecting from the intensity of his gaze. "Are you married? Children?" Something flickered across his face, too quick for me to interpret. "I was married. Karen and I divorced 5 years ago. We have 2 children. David's 38, a doctor in San Francisco, and Liza's 35, teaches high school mathematics in Seattle. 2 grandchildren between them." "I'm sorry about the divorce," I said, and meant it, even as a treacherous part of my heart did a little dance at the word divorced. "Don't be. We were compatible, I suppose. Karen was everything my parents thought I should want in a wife. Accomplished, from a good family, shared their values about success and stability." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "But she wasn't you." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, the same blush that had plagued me in high school whenever he said something that made my heart race. "Michael, let me get that coffee," he said, standing abruptly. "Don't go anywhere." I watched him walk to the counter, noting the slight favor of his left leg that suggested an old injury, the way he still moved with quiet purpose. While he waited in line, I tried to calm my racing pulse, to remind myself of all the reasons this was dangerous territory. I'd been divorced from Richard for 8 years now, after a marriage that had started with hope and devolved into polite coexistence. We'd raised 2 wonderful children, Emma, now 34 and living in Portland with her wife and adopted daughter, and James, 31 and currently dating someone new every month, much to his sister's exasperation. Richard and I had been good co-parents, but terrible spouses, and our divorce had been a relief to everyone involved. Since then, I'd had exactly 3 dates, all disasters arranged by well-meaning friends. There was Harold, who spent the entire evening talking about his deceased wife and showed me pictures of his bunions. Then Carl, who was lovely, but spent the whole time discussing his conspiracy theories about fluoride in the water. And finally David, not Michael's son, another David, who seemed nice until he mentioned that he was looking for someone to take care of his ailing mother full-time. After David, I'd sworn off dating entirely. I had my books, my volunteer work at the literacy center, my garden, my twice-weekly visits with Emma and little Sophie. It was a good life, I told myself, a complete life. I didn't need the complications that came with men and romance and all the ways people could disappoint each other. But sitting here, waiting for Michael to return with his coffee, I felt something I thought was safely buried, stirring to life. Hope. Terrifying, wonderful, completely impractical hope. He returned with a large coffee and what looked like a chocolate croissant. "I remembered you have a sweet tooth," he said, placing the pastry between us. "Some things never change." Some things do, I said quietly. My dentist would not approve of that croissant. He laughed, a rich, warm sound that made me remember slow dancing in his parents' restaurant after closing time, the way he'd hum along to the radio while we swayed between empty tables. So tell me about your life, Maggie. I know from Facebook that you were a librarian. You looked me up on Facebook? I interrupted, mortified. My Facebook profile was barely maintained, mostly pictures of Sophie and book recommendations from the library. Of course I did. Did you think I'd contact you without doing my research? His grin was boyish, unrepentant. You divorced Richard O'Brien in 2016. You have 2 children, Emma and James. You volunteer at a literacy center. You grow tomatoes, and you have a particular fondness for posting pictures of sunsets. That's thorough, I managed, torn between embarrassment and a flutter of pleasure that he'd cared enough to learn about my life. I've thought about you every day for 46 years, Maggie. Of course I was thorough. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands, staring at him across the small table. Michael, you can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true. Because I struggled for words, for all the rational reasons why this conversation was dangerous. Because we're not 17 anymore. Because life is complicated. Because I don't know how to do this. Do what? This, I gestured between us. Whatever this is. I don't know how to be the person you remember. I don't know if I want to be. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the same intensity he'd once brought to analyzing Hemingway short stories. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Then be who you are now. Be the woman who taught children to read for 30 years, who raised 2 kids who grew up to be good people, who posts pictures of sunsets because she still believes in finding beauty in ordinary moments. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Be the woman who said yes to meeting me today, even though it scared her. His touch was warm, familiar in a way that made my breath catch. I looked down at our hands, his still beautiful despite his age, mine showing every year I'd lived, every dish I'd washed, every book I'd shelved, every grandchild I'd held. I am scared, I whispered. Good, he said. That means this matters. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. Around us, the cafe hummed with other people's lives, conversations about work and weekend plans, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups and spoons, normal sounds of a normal Thursday afternoon that felt anything but normal to me. What do you want from me, Michael? I asked finally. What do you want from this? He considered the question seriously, his eyes never leaving my face. I want to know you, he said, the woman you became. I want to share meals with you and hear you laugh. I want to take walks and argue about books. And maybe, he paused, color rising in his cheeks. Maybe I want to find out if what we had was real or just the foolishness of youth. And if it was just foolishness, then at least we'll know. At least we'll have tried. I pulled my hand back, needing space to think. The croissant sat untouched between us, a sweet temptation I couldn't quite reach for, like everything else in this moment. I need to tell you something, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm not the same person you remember. I'm not the girl who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Life teaches you to be careful. It teaches you that people leave, that promises get broken, that even love isn't always enough. Is that what Richard taught you? The question was quiet but pointed. I met his eyes, seeing genuine concern there, and realized he deserved an honest answer. Richard was a good man, I said carefully. We just grew apart, became strangers living in the same house. By the end, we barely talked except about the children or household logistics. The divorce was, I searched for the right word, necessary. Sad, but necessary. "I'm sorry," Michael said, and I could hear that he meant it. That must have been painful. It was a relief, actually, which was almost worse than if it had been painful. I picked at the edge of my napkin, not trusting myself to look at him. I swore I'd never put myself in that position again, never risk becoming a stranger to someone I once loved. And now? Now I'm sitting in a cafe with my first love, feeling like I'm 17 again, and absolutely terrified that I'm going to make a fool of myself. "Maggie," his voice was soft, patient. "Look at me." I raised my eyes to his, seeing something there that made my chest tight with possibility and fear. "You could never make a fool of yourself with me. Never." The simple certainty in his voice undid something in me, some carefully constructed wall I'd built around my heart. Tears welled up despite my best efforts to keep them in check. "I don't know how to do this," I whispered again. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together." The cafe door chimed again, and I glanced over to see a young couple come in, laughing about something, the woman playfully bumping the man's shoulder as they got in line. They couldn't have been more than 25, their whole lives stretching ahead of them, full of possibilities and dreams they hadn't yet had the chance to break. I remembered being that young, that certain that love could conquer anything, before I learned about compromise and disappointment, about the way people could slowly drift apart, even while sharing the same bed, the same address, the same last name. "I should go," I said suddenly, reaching for my purse. The weight of the moment, of all the years between us, felt crushing. It was good to see you, Michael, really. "Don't." His hand shot out to cover mine again, more insistent this time. "Please, don't run away from me again." "Again?" I stared at him. "Michael, you're the one who left. You're the one who chose MIT over..." "Over what? Over working in my father's restaurant for the rest of my life? Over never leaving a 10-block radius of where I was born?" His voice was quiet but intense. "I was 18, Maggie. My parents had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had. How could I throw that away? You could have asked me to wait. You could have..." "I did ask you to wait." The words came out fierce, urgent. "I wrote you letters, dozens of them, that first year." "Did you think I just forgot about you?" I stared at him, confusion mixing with a growing dread. "What letters? Michael, I never got any letters." Something shifted in his expression, a dawning realization that made him sit back in his chair like he'd been struck. "Your mother," he said quietly. "She never gave them to you." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the cafe could hear it. "What are you talking about? I came home for Christmas break freshman year. I went to your house to see you. And your mother..." He ran his hand through his silver hair, looking suddenly older. "She told me you were dating someone else, that you'd moved on, that you didn't want to be tied down to high school memories. She said it would be kinder to let you go." "She said what?" My voice came out as a croak. "She made me promise to stop writing. Said the letters were just making it harder for you to move forward." He leaned forward urgently. "Maggie, I swear to you, I tried to respect your wishes. I thought you wanted me to leave you alone." The cafe feeded around me as I processed this revelation. My mother, who died 10 years ago, who'd taken whatever secrets she'd kept to her grave. My mother, who'd always been skeptical of teenage romance, who'd thought I was too young to know my own heart. "I waited for you," I whispered. "I waited and waited for some word, some sign that you still cared. I thought you'd forgotten about me the minute you left Boston." "Jesus, Maggie." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." We stared at each other across the table, the weight of 46 years of misunderstanding settling between us like a living thing. All those years of thinking he hadn't cared, of believing I hadn't been important enough to remember. All those years of carrying the hurt of being forgotten by the first person who'd ever made me feel truly seen. "She thought she was protecting me," I said finally, though the words felt like ash in my mouth. "She always said teenage heartbreak felt like the end of the world, but that I'd thank her someday for pushing me to focus on my future instead of dwelling on the past." "Did you thank her?" I thought about the path my life had taken. College, where I'd met Richard during my junior year, a safe, practical choice my mother had approved of. Marriage at 23, children by 27 and 30, a quiet, respectable life that had checked all the boxes on my mother's list of what made a woman successful. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. For a while, I thought I had. I had a good life, Michael. Not perfect, but good. I loved my children. I found meaning in my work. I had friends and hobbies, and it was enough. But, but, I never stopped wondering. What if? What might have been?" I met his eyes, seeing my own regret reflected there. And now I find out that what might have been was stolen from me. From both of us. We sat in the weight of that truth. 46 years of parallel lives that might have intersected, might have grown together instead of apart. I felt something cracking open inside me, some carefully maintained composure that had gotten me through decades of polite disappointment. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. My legs were unsteady, my hands shaking as I gathered my purse and coat. I can't." "Let me come with you," Michael said, rising too. I wanted to say no, wanted to run home to the safety of my quiet house and my carefully ordered life. But when I looked at his face, saw the concern and tenderness there, I found myself nodding. We walked outside into the crisp October air, Boston Common stretching green and gold before us. Couples strolled hand in hand. Children played on the playground while their parents watched from benches. Life continuing its normal rhythm around the earthquake that had just shifted the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my past. "Walk with me?" Michael asked, and I nodded again, not trusting my voice. We strolled slowly down the path, our footsteps crunching in the fallen leaves. I was intensely aware of his presence beside me, of the way he matched his pace to mine, of the decades-old muscle memory that made walking together feel natural despite all the years between. "Tell me about the letters," I said when I could finally speak again. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. "I wrote to you about everything, my classes, my roommate who collected vintage comic books, the way Boston looked different from Cambridge, how homesick I was, how much I missed our conversations." He paused by a bench, turning to face me. "How much I missed you." "What else?" "I sent you pressed flowers from the campus, terrible poetry that would make us both cringe now. Plans for summer break, for how we'd spend every minute together when I came home." His smile was sad, distant. "I told you I loved you in 17 different ways across 12 different letters." The words hit me like physical blows. 17 different ways. All those declarations of love I'd never heard, never held in my hands, never pressed to my heart in the lonely months after he'd left. "I would have waited," I whispered. "If I'd known, if I'd gotten even one of those letters, I would have waited." "I know," he said simply. "That's what made it so hard to believe you'd moved on so quickly. It didn't fit the Maggie I knew. But your mother seemed so certain, and I was just a scared 18-year-old who didn't know how to fight for what he wanted."
I closed my eyes, letting the October sun warm my face, trying to reconcile this new version of our history with the one I'd carried for so long. In this version, I hadn't been forgotten. I hadn't been deemed unworthy of remembrance. I had been loved, missed, mourned when the letters stopped coming and no responses arrived. "Did you really think about me every day?" I asked, opening my eyes to find him watching me with an expression that made my chest tight. "Every single day," he said. "Some days it was just a flash, a song on the radio, a girl with green eyes laughing in a coffee shop, the smell of the lilac perfume you wore. Other days it was everything, wondering where you were, if you were happy, if you ever thought of me." "I did," I admitted. "I thought of you often, especially in the early years. I'd see movies you would have loved, read books I wanted to discuss with you. I'd wonder if you were happy, if you'd found someone who understood you the way I felt like I did." "Did you love Richard?" The question was quiet, careful, but I heard the weight behind it. "I thought I did, in the beginning," I said honestly. "He was kind, reliable, wanted the same things I thought I wanted: a stable life, children, a house in the suburbs with a garden and good schools nearby." I sat down heavily on the bench, suddenly exhausted. But it was a different kind of love than what we had, quieter, less consuming. Michael sat beside me, careful to leave space between us. Consuming is a good word for it. What we had, it felt like I could drown in it. "Is that why you didn't fight harder when my mother told you I'd moved on?" He considered this, his brow furrowed. "Maybe. I was scared of how much I needed you, how much you mattered to me. When she said you wanted me to stop writing, part of me was almost," he struggled for the word, "relieved, because loving you felt dangerous, like I could lose myself in it." "And now?" He turned to look at me fully, his brown eyes serious behind his glasses. "Now I'm 64 years old, and I've spent most of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been braver, if I trusted what we had instead of letting fear and other people's opinions make my choices for me." "Michael, I'm not saying we can go back," he said quickly. "We can't undo 46 years. We can't become the people we would have been if things had been different. But maybe," he reached over, his fingers finding mine again, "maybe we can see who we are now. Maybe we can find out if there's still something worth fighting for." His touch sent warmth racing up my arm, and I realized with a start that I was crying. Tears I'd held back for decades. Tears for the girl I'd been, and the love I lost, and the letters I'd never received. "I'm scared," I said again, the words becoming a refrain. "I know," he said gently. "So am I. But Maggie, I'm more scared of walking away from you again. I'm more scared of spending whatever years I have left wondering what if for the second time." I looked at our joined hands, at the way his fingers fit between mine, like they'd been designed for it. At 63 and 64, we had laugh lines and age spots, wedding rings, tan lines that had faded, and stories written in our skin that we'd never shared with each other. We were different people than the teenagers who'd fallen in love over Shakespeare sonnets and stolen kisses in empty hallways. But sitting there in the October sun, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine, I could feel 17-year-old Maggie stirring to life inside me. The girl who'd believed in happy endings, who thought love could overcome any obstacle, who'd seen magic in ordinary moments and possibility in every sunrise. "What would we even do?" I asked, not pulling my hand away. "Where would we start?" "Dinner," he said immediately, and I laughed despite my tears. "Tomorrow night, if you'll have me." Somewhere we can talk without curious college students eavesdropping. Somewhere we can figure out if this is real or just nostalgia dressed up as something more. And if it's nostalgia, then we'll have shared one good meal and some honest conversation. We'll part as friends who finally got closure on an old wound. And if it's real? His smile was soft, hopeful, tinged with the cautious wonder I felt blooming in my chest. Then, maybe, we'll have dinner the night after that, too. I sat there in the sunshine, holding hands with the boy I'd loved at 17, the man I was terrified to love at 63. Around us, Boston carried on its autumn afternoon business, joggers pounding past, mothers pushing strollers, an elderly man feeding pigeons from a park bench. Ordinary life, continuing its ordinary rhythm, while I sat at the center of an extraordinary moment. "Okay," I whispered, the word barely audible over the sound of my racing heart. "Okay? Okay, Michael. Tomorrow night. Dinner." I squeezed his hand, felt him squeeze back. "Let's see what happens." His smile could have powered the entire city. "Let's see what happens," he agreed. And for the first time in 46 years, I let myself believe that something beautiful might be beginning, even as I sat there terrified that I was too old, too set in my ways, too damaged by decades of careful living to risk my heart again. But maybe that was what made it worth risking. Maybe at 63, I finally understood that the biggest risk wasn't loving someone who might leave. The biggest risk was never allowing yourself to love at all. I spent that evening in my kitchen, stress cleaning the counters that were already spotless, while my daughter Emma sat at the breakfast bar, watching me with the amused patience she'd perfected during her teenage years. "Mom, you've wiped down that same section of counter 6 times, she observed, sipping the chamomile tea I'd made, more for myself than for her. "Want to tell me what's really going on?" I paused mid-wipe, realizing I'd been scrubbing the same invisible stain for the past 5 minutes. Emma had inherited Richard's practical nature along with my stubborn streak, creating a daughter who saw through my carefully constructed facades with laser precision. "I had coffee with someone today," I said carefully, folding the dish rag with unnecessary precision. "Someone interesting?" "Someone from high school." I turned to face her, taking in the way her eyebrows rose with curiosity. At 34, Emma had my green eyes and her father's steady temperament, though right now she looked like she was trying not to smile. "Like a friend from high school, or—" She let the question hang, her expression growing more intrigued by the second. "More like my first boyfriend." Emma's teacup clinked against its saucer as she set it down a little too quickly. "Mom, are you telling me you went on a date?" "It wasn't a date," I said automatically, then caught myself. Well, maybe it was. I don't know. We just talked. "About what?" I sank into the chair across from her, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. "About everything. About nothing. About the letters he wrote that I never received." Emma leaned forward, her journalist instincts kicking in. She'd inherited my love of stories, but where I'd found mine in books, she'd found hers in the real lives of real people. "What letters?" So I told her everything. About Michael, about the way we'd fallen in love over shared homework and stolen moments after school. About the heartbreak of his leaving, the years of wondering why he'd never written, the slow acceptance that what we'd had hadn't been as important to him as it had been to me. And then about this afternoon's revelation, about my mother's well-intentioned interference, about 46 years of missed connections and parallel lives. Emma listened without interruption, her expression shifting from curiosity to sympathy to something that looked almost like anger. "Grandma did that?" she said when I finished. "She kept his letters from you?" "She thought she was protecting me," I said, though the words felt hollow. She always worried that I lived too much in my head, that I romanticized things. She probably thought teenage love was just a distraction from building a real life. But it was your choice to make, Emma said firmly. She had no right to make that decision for you. I nodded, feeling tears threaten again. It was one thing to process this alone, another entirely to see the situation through my daughter's eyes, to hear her validate the anger I'd been afraid to fully feel. "What was he like?" Emma asked, more gently. "Today, I mean. Not the boy you remembered, but the man he is now." I considered the question, trying to separate the Michael of this afternoon from the overlay of memory and emotion that colored every interaction. Older, obviously, more confident than he was at 18, but still gentle, still thoughtful. I traced the rim of my own teacup, remembering the way he'd looked at me across that cafe table. Still capable of making me feel like the most important person in the room. And I'm terrified, I admitted. "Emma, I don't know how to do this. I haven't dated since your father, and that was," I calculated quickly. "God, that was 41 years ago. I don't know the rules anymore. I don't know if there even are rules." Emma reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you, something I probably should have said a long time ago." Her tone made my stomach clench with worry. "What is it?" "I used to worry about you. After the divorce especially. You seemed so determined to be fine on your own, content with your books and your garden and your volunteer work. And maybe you were content, but you never seemed joyful."
I was happy. You were managing, Emma corrected gently. There's a difference. You were getting through your days, checking off your lists, being productive and helpful, and all the things you thought you were supposed to be. But when was the last time you did something just because it made you feel alive? I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. When was the last time I'd felt truly alive? Not content, not satisfied with a job well done, but electrically, vibrantly alive. This afternoon, sitting across from Michael in that cafe, feeling 17 again and terrified and hopeful all at once. "He makes you feel something," Emma continued, reading my expression accurately. "Something more than just okay. Something that scares you because it matters." "What if it doesn't work out?" I whispered. "What if we've both built this up in our minds and the reality is just disappointing?" "Then at least you'll know," Emma said, echoing Michael's words from earlier. "And if it doesn't work out, you'll still have tried. You'll have been brave enough to risk feeling something real." "I'm 63 years old, Emma. I'm supposed to be past all this uncertainty, this giddy, nervous energy that feels completely inappropriate for someone my age." Emma laughed, a sound full of love and exasperation. "Mom, who told you there was an expiration date on feeling giddy? Who decided that falling in love was just for young people?" "Society, I suppose. The idea that women my age should be content with their grandchildren and their book clubs and their—" "Bullshit," Emma said firmly, and I was so startled by her uncharacteristic profanity that I actually smiled. "Complete and total bullshit. You deserve to be loved, Mom. You deserve to feel excited about someone, to have your heart race when they text you, to spend too much time picking out what to wear for dinner. He asked me to dinner tomorrow night." "And what did you say?" "I said yes." Emma's smile was radiant. "Good." "Now, let's talk about what you're going to wear, because if you're planning on that navy blouse again, we need to discuss your options." I laughed despite myself, feeling some of the tension in my chest ease. "What's wrong with my navy blouse?" "Nothing if you're going to a PTA meeting in 1987, but for a first date with the love of your life, we can do better."
He's not the love of my life, I protested weakly. Emma raised an eyebrow. Mom, you've been talking about him for an hour and you're glowing, literally glowing. I haven't seen you look this alive in years. She paused, her expression growing more serious. And from what you've told me about your marriage to Dad, I don't think you ever glowed like this about him. The words hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. Richard had been a good husband in all the practical ways, faithful, hardworking, present for school plays and soccer games and family vacations. But he'd never made my pulse race, never made me feel like I might burst with the sheer joy of being alive. Our love had been comfortable, predictable, safe. Nothing like the electric current that had run through me today when Michael's fingers brushed mine. Your father and I loved each other, I said carefully. I know you did, but Mom, there are different kinds of love. The kind you had with Dad was good, solid partnership love. The kind that builds families and pays mortgages and shows up for Little League games. Emma leaned forward, her eyes intense. But this thing with Michael, this sounds like the kind of love that changes everything. The kind that makes you want to dance in grocery store aisles and stay up all night talking and feel grateful just to be alive in the same world as someone. You're very wise for 34, I murmured. I learned from watching you, she said simply. I learned what it looks like when someone settles for fine instead of reaching for extraordinary. And Mom, you deserve extraordinary. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling around us. Through the kitchen window, I could see my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, walking her ancient golden retriever, the same route they'd taken every evening for the past 8 years. Routine, comfortable, predictable, safe. The life I'd built for myself since the divorce. What if I've forgotten how to be with someone? I asked suddenly. What if I'm too set in my ways, too used to being alone? What if I disappoint him? What if he disappoints you? Emma countered. What if you discover that 46 years have changed him into someone you don't recognize? What if the chemistry is gone? What if you have nothing to talk about? What if he's become boring or bitter or completely incompatible with who you are now? That's not helping, I said dryly. My point is, there are a million what-ifs on both sides. You could spend the rest of your life imagining all the ways this could go wrong. Or you could put on a beautiful dress tomorrow night and find out what actually happens. Emma grinned. Besides, if it's a disaster, at least you'll have a good story to tell. And if it's not a disaster, then maybe you'll have something even better than a good story. I stood up, suddenly restless, and walked to the window. Mrs. Patterson had disappeared around the corner, but I could see lights coming on in houses throughout the neighborhood. Other people settling into their evening routines, cooking dinner, helping with homework, watching television, normal lives, uncompromised by the complication of unexpected second chances. I called James earlier, I said, not turning around, told him about Michael. What did he say? He said, and I quote, "Mom, if you don't go for it, I'll never forgive you. Also, do you need me to come over and help you pick out an outfit because your fashion sense peaked in 1992? Emma burst into laughter. I love my brother. Did you tell him about tomorrow night? I did. He said he was proud of me for being brave enough to say yes. I turned back to face her. But Emma, what if I'm not actually brave? What if I'm just scared of being alone forever? Is that why you said yes? Because you're scared of being alone? I considered the question honestly. No, I said finally. I said yes because when I looked into his eyes today, I felt something I thought was gone forever. I felt possibility. Then that's your answer. Emma stood and came to stand beside me at the window. Mom, you've spent my entire life taking care of other people. You took care of Dad. You took care of James and me. You take care of your literacy students. You take care of Sophie when I need a babysitter.
When was the last time you did something purely for yourself, something that made you happy without worrying about whether it was practical or sensible or appropriate? I don't know, I whispered. Then maybe it's time to find out what that feels like. She put her arm around my shoulders. And maybe it's time to let someone take care of you for a change. That night, after Emma had gone home with strict instructions to text her updates about my outfit selection, I sat in my bedroom surrounded by half my closet spread across the bed. At some point in the past 8 years of living alone, I'd apparently stopped buying clothes that made me feel beautiful and started buying clothes that were simply functional. Beige pants that didn't show stains, navy blouses that went with everything, cardigans in muted tones that were appropriate for volunteer work and grocery shopping, and all the other mundane activities that filled my days. Nothing that said I'm a woman who deserves to be desired. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Michael's contact. When had I stopped saving phone numbers under full names? And stared at it for a long moment before typing a message. Looking forward to tomorrow.
Where should I meet you? The response came back almost immediately. I'll pick you up at 6:30. Wear something that makes you feel beautiful. I stared at the text, my heart doing that fluttering thing again. When was the last time anyone had told me to wear something that made me feel beautiful? When was the last time I'd even asked myself what made me feel beautiful? I set the phone aside and looked at the clothes scattered across my bed with new eyes. The navy blouse that Emma had dismissed, the black pants I wore to every semi-formal event, the gray cardigan that had been my go-to for 5 years. Safe choices, invisible choices, choices that said, I'm here, but I don't want to take up too much space. In the back of my closet, behind the practical clothes and the comfortable shoes and the sensible coats, I found a dress I'd forgotten I owned. Deep green silk that brought out my eyes, with a neckline that was modest but flattering, sleeves that would hide my upper arms but still feminine. I'd bought it 3 years ago for Emma's college friend's wedding, then lost my nerve and worn the navy blouse instead. I held it up to myself in the mirror, remembering the way it had looked on the store hanger, the way the saleswoman had smiled when I tried it on and said it was perfect for me. Wear something that makes you feel beautiful, I whispered to my reflection. I hung the dress carefully on my closet door and went to bed, but sleep was elusive. I kept thinking about Michael's face across that cafe table, about the way he'd said my name like a prayer, about the 46 years of letters I'd never received, about Emma's words, "You deserve extraordinary." Did I? At 63? With my graying hair and my crow's feet and my body that had borne 2 children and survived a mastectomy and carried me through more than 6 decades of living? Did I deserve to feel beautiful, desired, cherished? Did I deserve a love story at this stage of my life? Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted off, and I dreamed of dancing in an empty restaurant while a boy with gentle eyes hummed along to the radio, our whole lives stretching ahead of us, full of possibility. The next evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 6:15, putting the finishing touches on makeup I'd applied with more care than I'd used in years. The green dress fit exactly as I'd remembered, skimming my figure in ways that were flattering without being inappropriate for a woman my age. I'd even splurged on a trip to the salon that afternoon, where Janet had styled my hair in soft waves that framed my face and somehow made me look 10 years younger. "You look lovely," I told my reflection, practicing the confidence I hoped to feel when Michael saw me. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:30, and my heart jumped into my throat. I took a deep breath, smoothed my skirt one last time, and walked to the front door on legs that felt unsteady. Through the peephole, I could see Michael standing on my front step, holding a small bouquet of white roses. He was wearing a navy sport coat over dark jeans, and even through the distorted lens of the peephole, he looked handsome and nervous and absolutely real.
I opened the door, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "Maggie," he said softly, and I heard wonder in his voice. "You're breathtaking." Heat flooded my cheeks. "Thank you," I managed. "You look quite handsome yourself." He held out the roses with a smile that was pure Michael, a little shy, a little hopeful. "I remember you always loved white roses. I hope that hasn't changed." I took the flowers, our fingers brushing in the exchange, and the familiar electric current ran up my arm. "Some things don't change," I said quietly. "Let me just put these in water." While I arranged the roses in a vase, I was acutely aware of Michael standing in my entryway, taking in the life I'd built for myself. The photos of Emma and James and Sophie on the console table, the stack of books I was always meaning to read, the reading glasses I'd forgotten I'd left on the hall table. The evidence of a quiet, well-organized, solitary life. "Ready?" I asked, returning with my purse and a light jacket. "Ready," he said, but he didn't immediately move toward the door. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Maggie, before we go, I need you to know something." His voice was serious, intent. "I've been thinking about this all day, all night, about you, about us, about what this means." My heart started racing. "Michael." "I'm not looking for a casual dinner companion," he said firmly. "I'm not looking for someone to pass the time with or to ease the loneliness. I'm 64 years old, and I don't have time for games or pretense." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "I'm here because I still love you, because I never stopped loving you. And if that's too much, if that's too fast, if that's not what you want to hear, then we should probably stay in and just talk instead of pretending this is a casual dinner between old friends." The words hung in the air between us, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in their intensity. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into unknown territory, while behind me lay the safe, familiar landscape of the life I'd carefully constructed. "Say something, Michael," said quietly, and I could hear the fear underneath the courage. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd written me letters I'd never received, who'd thought about me every day for 46 years, who was brave enough to stand in my hallway and risk everything on the truth. This man who still made me feel like the most important person in the world. "I'm terrified," I said honestly. "I'm absolutely terrified, Michael. But I think I love you too, still, again." The words came out in a rush before I could second-guess them, and that terrifies me more than anything because I don't know how to do this, how to be someone who gets a second chance at happiness. His smile was radiant, transforming his face into something so beautiful it made my chest ache. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, reaching for my hand. "We'll take it one day at a time, one dinner at a time, one conversation at a time. And if we mess it up, if we disappoint each other, then we'll deal with that too." He squeezed my fingers gently. "But Maggie, I'd rather mess this up with you than spend another day wondering what might have been." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and let him lead me out into the October evening. His car was parked in my driveway, a silver sedan that looked well-maintained and practical. He opened the passenger door for me, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply appreciated. "Where are we going?" I asked as he pulled out of my neighborhood. "Do you remember Gino's, the little Italian place on Hanover Street?" I gasped. "It's still there?" "Still there, still family-owned, still makes the best chicken parmigiana in the North End." He glanced over at me, his expression soft with memory. I hoped it might be nice to go somewhere that has good memories attached. "Gino's,"
where he'd taken me for my 18th birthday, the first time I'd ever been to a real restaurant where the waiters wore aprons and the bread came warm to the table. Where he'd saved up for weeks to pay for our dinner, where I'd felt so grown up and sophisticated sitting across from him in my best dress, talking about our dreams for the future. "You remember everything," I murmured. "I remember everything about you," he corrected gently, "the important things anyway." The drive into the city gave us time to talk about safer subjects: his work as an engineer, my years at the library, our children's accomplishments, the books we'd read, the movies we'd enjoyed. Easy conversation that helped settle my nerves and reminded me why I'd fallen in love with his mind all those years ago. Michael had always been thoughtful, deliberate in his opinions, willing to consider multiple perspectives on complex issues. That hadn't changed. If anything, age and experience had given him more depth, more nuance in his thinking. Gino's looked exactly as I remembered it: red checkered tablecloths, wine bottles with candles stuck in them, the smell of garlic and basil and possibility hanging in the air. The hostess, a woman about my age who might have been the daughter of the family that had owned it in our youth, seated us at a corner table that felt intimate without being too secluded. "This is surreal," I said, looking around at the familiar surroundings. "I keep expecting to see our 18-year-old selves walk through the door." "I know what you mean." Michael's eyes were warm as he studied the menu, though I suspected he was seeing the same ghosts I was. "Do you still love the chicken parmigiana?" "Some things don't change," I said, echoing my earlier words about the roses. We ordered wine, a nice Chianti that was probably more expensive than our entire meal had been 46 years ago, and settled into the kind of deep conversation that had always come naturally between us. "Tell me about your marriage," I said when the wine arrived and we'd navigated the safer topics. "Not just the facts. Tell me what it was really like." Michael considered the question, swirling his wine in its glass. She was everything that looked right on paper. Beautiful, accomplished, came from a good family. My parents adored her. But I never felt with her the way I felt with you. He met my eyes across the table. I kept waiting for it to happen, for that spark to catch fire. I thought maybe it would grow over time, that mature love was different from teenage passion. And did it? "We were compatible," he said carefully. "We wanted the same things: success, children, a nice house, financial security. We rarely fought. We agreed on most major decisions. We were good parents together." "That sounds like a good marriage." "It was a functional marriage," Michael corrected. "But Maggie, I never once felt with Karen the way I felt this afternoon when you walked back from the restroom and I watched you moving through the cafe toward me. I never felt my heart race when she walked into a room, never felt like the air was charged with electricity when she touched my hand." I set down my wine glass with trembling fingers. "Michael, I'm not saying this to hurt anyone or to diminish what Karen and I had," he said quickly. "We built a life together, raised good children, had many happy moments. But it wasn't," he searched for the words, "it wasn't transcendent. It wasn't the kind of love that makes you grateful to be alive." Our food arrived, providing a brief respite from the intensity of the conversation. The chicken parmigiana was every bit as good as I remembered, and for a few minutes we ate in comfortable silence, letting the weight of his words settle between us. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "What was it like being married to Richard?" I took a sip of wine, considering how to answer honestly without sounding bitter or ungrateful. "Richard was a good man," I said finally. "Kind, responsible, devoted to the children. He never forgot a birthday or an anniversary. He helped with homework. He fixed things around the house when they broke. But we became strangers who happened to share a house and a bank account." The words came out more bluntly than I'd intended. Somewhere along the way, we stopped really seeing each other.
We'd have entire conversations about schedules and groceries and who was picking up the kids from soccer practice, and never once talk about anything that actually mattered. When did you know it was over? I thought about it, remembering the slow erosion of intimacy, the way we'd gradually retreated into separate spaces, even while living in the same house. There was an evening about 2 years before we separated, I said slowly. I'd made his favorite dinner, opened a bottle of good wine, put on music I thought he'd enjoy. I was trying to, I don't know, recreate some romance, I suppose, some connection. What happened? He came home, ate the dinner while reading emails on his phone, thanked me politely, and then spent the evening watching television while I cleaned up. I smiled ruefully. I realized that night that we weren't married anymore. We were just two people who happened to be living parallel lives in the same space. Did you try to fix it? We tried counseling for a while, but you can't counsel someone into feeling something they don't feel, into wanting something they don't want. I met his eyes across the table. The counselor kept asking us what we loved about each other, what drew us together, what made us want to fight for the marriage. And we'd sit there in silence because neither of us could remember. "I'm sorry," Michael said quietly. "Don't be. The divorce was sad, but it was also a relief, for both of us, I think." Richard remarried 2 years later, a lovely woman named Patricia, who shares his passion for golf and traveling in their RV. They seem genuinely happy together. "And you never remarried?" I laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. 3 disastrous dates in 8 years. I decided I was better off alone. Until yesterday. Until yesterday, I agreed softly. We finished dinner talking about easier things, books we'd read, places we traveled, funny stories about our grown children. The conversation flowed as naturally as it had when we were teenagers, punctuated by laughter and moments of comfortable silence. But underneath the easy banter, I was intensely aware of the current running between us, the way his eyes lingered on my face when he thought I wasn't looking, the way my pulse jumped every time he reached across the table to touch my hand. This was dangerous territory, this feeling of coming alive after years of simply existing, this sense that the world was suddenly full of color again after I'd grown accustomed to living in shades of gray. "Walk with me?" he asked when we'd finished our coffee and he'd paid the check despite my protests. We strolled slowly through the North End, past the narrow streets and brick buildings that held so many memories. The October night was crisp but not cold, perfect for walking, and I found myself matching his pace naturally, our shoulders occasionally brushing as we navigated the uneven sidewalks. "Do you remember the first time we walked these streets?" he asked as we paused outside a bakery that had been here since our youth. "You bought me a cannoli and got powdered sugar all over your nose," I said, smiling at the memory. "I wanted to brush it off for you, but I was too shy to touch your face." "I was hoping you would," he admitted. "I probably left it there longer than necessary, just in case you worked up the courage." We walked in comfortable silence for a while, and I found myself relaxing into the evening, into his presence, into the possibility that this might actually be real. That at 63, I might be getting a second chance at the kind of love I thought existed only in novels and movies. But as we turned the corner toward where he parked the car, reality came crashing back. This wasn't a fairy tale. We weren't teenagers with our whole lives ahead of us. We were older adults with complicated histories, with children and grandchildren and ex-spouses and health concerns, and all the messy realities of life in the 21st century. "Michael," I said, stopping suddenly in the middle of the sidewalk, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He turned to face me, his expression growing serious. "Anything." "What do you want from this? From me? Not the romantic answer you gave me this afternoon, but the practical one, the realistic one." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly feeling the cold. "Are you looking for a companion to travel with? Someone to go to dinner with occasionally? Are you hoping we'll move in together, get married, blend our lives completely? Are you looking for someone to take care of you as you age, or someone to take care of you if you get sick? He was quiet for a long moment, considering my questions with the seriousness they deserved. I don't know, he said finally. I wish I had a clear answer for you, but I don't. All I know is that I want to find out what's possible between us. I want to spend time with you, to get to know the woman you've become, to see if what we had can grow into something new. And if it can't, then at least we'll know we tried. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. Maggie, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or move in with me next week. I'm asking you to have dinner with me again, to take walks like this, to see what develops naturally between us without putting pressure on it to be anything other than what it is. What if one of us gets sick? What if we discover we're incompatible as older adults? What if we spend so much time worrying about what might go wrong that we miss what might go right? He interrupted gently. Maggie, at our age, there are no guarantees. There never were, really, but now we're old enough to understand that. All we can do is be honest with each other, be kind to each other, and see what happens. I studied his face in the glow of the streetlight, seeing sincerity there, seeing hope, seeing a man who was willing to risk heartbreak for the possibility of something beautiful. I'm scared of being hurt again, I whispered. So am I, he said simply, but I'm more scared of walking away from you for the second time in my life. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I could walk away now. I could thank him for a lovely evening, go home to my quiet house and my predictable routine, my safe life that held no risk of disappointment or heartbreak. Or I could step into the unknown with this man who still made my heart race, who still looked at me like I was worth cherishing. Okay, I said, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. Okay, Michael, let's see what happens. His smile was soft, relieved, full of quiet joy. Thank you, he said, and then, so gently I might have imagined it, he leaned down and kissed my forehead. The touch of his lips against my skin sent warmth flooding through me, and I realized with a start that this was the first time in almost a decade that I'd been kissed by anyone other than my children and grandchildren. Let me take you home, he said quietly. The drive back to my house was comfortable, filled with soft music and easy conversation about the evening, about the food, about the changes in the North End since our youth. But underneath the casual talk, I was hyper-aware of his presence, of the way the dashboard lights highlighted his profile, of the careful way he drove through my neighborhood, like he was already learning the route home to me. When he pulled into my driveway, I felt a flutter of panic. What were the rules for this? Were we supposed to kiss goodnight? Was he expecting to come in? Was I supposed to invite him in? I felt like a teenager again, uncertain and awkward, and desperately hoping I wouldn't embarrass myself. Thank you for tonight, I said as he walked me to my front door. For the dinner, for the walk, for being patient with me. Thank you for saying yes, he replied, for taking a chance on us. We stood on my front step, and I could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that what happened next would set the tone for whatever came after. I'd like to see you again, he said quietly, soon, if you're willing. I'd like that too. Tomorrow's Saturday. Would you like to go to the farmer's market and maybe lunch after? The invitation was so normal, so wonderfully ordinary, that I felt something tight in my chest begin to relax. This didn't have to be dramatic or overwhelming. It could just be two people spending time together, getting to know each other again. I'd love to, I said. He smiled, and then, with movements so careful and deliberate I had time to stop him if I wanted to, he leaned down and kissed me softly on the lips. It was barely more than a whisper of contact, sweet and tentative, and over before I could fully process it. But it sent electricity racing through my entire body, waking up parts of myself I thought were permanently dormant. "Good night, Maggie," he said softly. "Good night, Michael." I watched him walk back to his car, waited until he'd backed out of my driveway and driven away before I went inside. In my kitchen, I leaned against the counter and touched my lips, still feeling the phantom pressure of his kiss. At 63 years old, after decades of thinking my romantic life was over, I was falling in love again, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring.